Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into one of the most talked about global moments right now. World leaders reacting to Ukraine's huge strike and what it means for the future of this conflict and global politics. This event didn't just shake the battlefield, it sent shockwaves through capitals across the world, triggering urgent meetings, strong statements, and serious concerns about what comes next. The strike carried out by Ukraine marked a significant escalation in both scale and impact. It targeted key military and strategic locations, showing a level of coordination and capability that immediately drew global attention. For many observers, this was not just another attack in an ongoing war, but a clear message about Ukraine's determination and evolving military strength. As news of the strike broke, reactions from world leaders came quickly. Governments across Europe, North America, and beyond issued statements within hours. Some praised Ukraine's right to defend itself, while others urged restraint, warning that the conflict could spiral further out of control if escalation continues. In Washington, officials emphasized support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The tone was firm but cautious. Leaders highlighted that Ukraine has the right to respond to aggression, yet they also stressed the importance of avoiding actions that could drag NATO directly into a wider war. Behind the scenes, emergency briefings reportedly took place to assess potential consequences. European leaders reacted with a mix of solidarity and anxiety. Countries closest to the conflict expressed strong backing for Ukraine, seeing the strike as a justified response after months of pressure and attacks. At the same time, there was visible concern about retaliation and the risk of instability spreading across the region. In London, officials described the strike as a turning point. They pointed out that it demonstrates Ukraine's ability to hit high-value targets and shift the momentum of the war. However, they also acknowledged that such moves increase the stakes, making diplomatic solutions both more urgent and more difficult. Paris took a slightly more measured approach. Leaders there called for calm while reaffirming support for Ukraine. They stressed the need for continued dialogue, even as fighting intensifies. The message was clear: military actions may change the balance on the ground, but diplomacy remains essential to prevent a wider catastrophe. Berlin's reaction reflected internal debate. Some officials argued that Ukraine's strike was inevitable after prolonged conflict, while others worried about energy security and economic fallout if tensions escalate further. Germany's leadership faced the challenge of balancing domestic concerns with international commitments. Eastern European nations responded with strong voices of support. For them, the strike reinforced fears they've long held about regional security. Leaders in these countries warned that any weakness in supporting Ukraine could embolden further aggression and threaten neighboring states. Beyond Europe, reactions were equally significant. In Moscow, officials condemned the strike in harsh terms. They described it as a provocation and warned of serious consequences. The rhetoric signaled that Russia views this action as crossing a critical line, raising fears of intensified retaliation. Russian media amplified these statements, framing the strike as evidence of Western involvement. This narrative aimed to rally domestic support and justify potential countermeasures. Analysts noted that such messaging often precedes major strategic decisions. In Beijing, the response was carefully worded. Chinese leaders called for restraint from all sides and emphasized the importance of stability. They avoided direct criticism or endorsement, instead urging dialogue and warning against actions that could disrupt global markets and security. India's reaction focused on neutrality and concern for global stability. Officials reiterated their call for peace and diplomacy, stressing that prolonged conflict harms not only the region but the entire world, particularly developing economies affected by food and energy disruptions. In the Middle East, leaders watched closely. Some governments expressed concern about the precedent such strikes set, especially in an already volatile global environment. Others focused on the potential impact on energy prices and supply routes, which are critical to their economies. The United Nations quickly became a focal point for international discussion. Emergency sessions were convened, with diplomats debating the legality and implications of the strike. While some delegates defended Ukraine's actions as self-defense, others warned that escalation could undermine international norms. The UN Secretary General called for de-escalation, urging all parties to prioritize civilian protection. His statement reflected a broader fear that intensified fighting would lead to greater humanitarian suffering, displacing more people and straining already overwhelmed aid systems. Military analysts around the world weighed in on the strike's significance. Many described it as a demonstration of Ukraine's growing operational reach. They noted that such capabilities could alter strategic calculations on both sides of the conflict. At the same time, experts warned that success on the battlefield does not always translate into long-term advantage. They pointed out that major strikes often trigger counter-strikes, potentially leading to cycles of retaliation that are hard to stop. Public opinion also played a role in shaping leaders' reactions. In countries supporting Ukraine, many citizens saw the strike as a symbol of resistance and resilience. In others, especially those facing economic pressures, there was anxiety about prolonged conflict and rising costs of living. Social media amplified every reaction. Clips of speeches, official statements, and expert opinions spread rapidly, fueling debate and sometimes misinformation. Governments were forced to respond not only to events on the ground but also to narratives forming online. The strike also raised questions about future military aid. Some leaders suggested it shows Ukraine can effectively use advanced weapons, strengthening the case for continued support. Others worried that providing more powerful systems could further escalate tensions. Defense ministers across NATO reportedly reviewed their positions. The strike prompted discussions about preparedness, deterrence, and the alliance's role if the conflict expands. While no immediate changes were announced, the tone suggested increased vigilance. Economic implications were another major concern. Markets reacted with caution, as investors considered the risk of broader instability. Energy prices fluctuated, reflecting fears of supply disruptions if the conflict intensifies. For Ukraine, the strike was framed as both a military and psychological move. Leaders in Kiev emphasized that it demonstrated their ability to defend themselves and challenge their opponents' assumptions. They argued that strength on the battlefield is essential for meaningful negotiations. Ukrainian officials also used the moment to appeal for continued international support. They highlighted the sacrifices being made and warned that wavering commitment could undermine hard-won progress. The humanitarian aspect remained central to many leaders' statements. Even those supportive of Ukraine emphasized the need to protect civilians and infrastructure. Aid organizations warned that escalation would worsen conditions for millions already affected by the war. As days passed, reactions continued to evolve. Initial shock gave way to deeper analysis. Leaders began considering not just the immediate impact but the long-term consequences for global security and the international order. Some commentators argued that the strike could push the conflict toward a decisive phase. Others believed it would entrench positions, making compromise even harder. Both views underscored uncertainty about what comes next. Historical comparisons were frequently mentioned. Analysts drew parallels to past conflicts where major strikes changed momentum but also led to prolonged struggles. These comparisons served as cautionary tales for leaders weighing their responses. Behind closed doors, diplomacy intensified. Phone calls between presidents, emergency summits, and back-channel talks aimed to prevent miscalculation. While public statements were often firm, private discussions reportedly focused on avoiding uncontrolled escalation. The role of alliances came into sharper focus. The strike tested the unity of groups supporting Ukraine, revealing both strong solidarity and underlying differences in risk tolerance. Managing these dynamics became a priority for many leaders. For neutral countries, the situation posed difficult choices. Maintaining balanced relations while responding to global pressure required careful messaging. The strike made neutrality harder to sustain. As expectations for clearer positions grew, media coverage shaped public perception worldwide. Headlines emphasized the dramatic nature of the strike and the strong reactions it triggered. In some regions, coverage focused on military details, while in others, humanitarian and economic angles dominated. As the dust settled, one thing became clear: Ukraine's huge strike was more than a battlefield event. It became a global moment, forcing leaders everywhere to confront uncomfortable questions about power, security, and the future of international relations. The coming weeks will reveal whether this moment leads to renewed diplomatic efforts or deeper confrontation. World leaders now face the challenge of responding in ways that protect their interests without pushing the world closer to a broader conflict. For viewers watching from around the globe, this situation is a reminder of how interconnected the world has become. A single strike in one region can ripple across continents, influencing politics, economies, and lives far beyond the battlefield. As reactions continue to unfold, staying informed and understanding the broader context is more important than ever. The choices made by leaders now will shape not just the outcome of this conflict, but the direction of global stability in the years ahead. And as always, we'll keep following these developments closely, breaking down what they mean and why they matter, so you can stay informed about one of the most critical global stories of our time.